Okay, welcome back to another edition of how to join pre join your cut strips of fabric to create binding. Um, in a previous video, you saw me talk about how I attach my binding. This little video, I wanted to show you how I make my binding. Um, so I use 2¼ inch strips of fabric. Um, what you want to do is you want to, again, you want to put you'll take 2 strips of fabric, okay, and you want the right sides, always right sides together. So, and I always keep track of that with the folds. So I put the folds facing each other, and I know I've got the right side of the fabric. So what you're going to do is you're going to lay the right side up of the end of one strip and right side up with the end of another strip, and you're going to take a small ruler and you're going to go and draw a line. You can use a pencil, you can use a marking pen, whatever your preference is. I'm just going to use this blue um, pencil so that it's easy for you to see. And you're going to draw a straight line from corner to corner. I don't know if you can see that or not. It doesn't do well when I'm trying to draw on this map, this wool mat here. Draw it where you can see it. But you're going to draw that line corner to corner, and that's where you're going to sew. You're going to sew corner to corner, okay, from here to here. So I'm gonna step over here, and you're gonna do all of your strips. So however many strips you need. I like to use the Robert Kaufman's calculator app on my cell phone, to calculate how much I'm going to need based on the size of my quilts or quilted project. So if you're making binding for a quilted project, you do need to know the dimensions of your project to determine how much fabric you need. I also cut mine at 2¼ inches. I told you that already. And usually what I do, and I'll show you what I do as we're moving along, is I actually take a cut of the strip that I'm working on. And that way I know that I have exactly the right binding tool to use to make that particular binding. This is an older one. This is one I use for teaching purposes. I also have another colored one that I use so that, and what I mean by 2¼ inch binding is that your strip is this wide. So unfolded, it's the same width. It's 2¼ inches wide. I use this colored one on the white stuff, and I use white one on the color stuff. And because I've gotten to the point where I like my binding a little smaller, I like it to fit a little snugger, I use 2¼ inch. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take it over here to the sewing machine. And I'm going to sew across that line. I'm switching my foot, but I'm just going to real quick, I'm going to sew across that line. Make sure my pieces are lined up. And if you need to. And like how that did not stay lined up. Careful, make sure that your pieces are lined up correctly. I'm also using a darker thread so that you can see. You also, because because you're, and then you stitch from corner to corner. Okay, just like that. Okay, so another thing to take into consideration when you are when you're stitching your thing together, because we know that we're gonna iron this flat and open. Okay, we're gonna iron it open, iron the seam flat and open. We don't have a dark side to flip, to iron to or to press to. So when your sewing seam's open, you need to go to your sewing machine and change your stitch length. Okay, so once you get your seams, what you're going to do is you're going to trim these. Okay, so again, what you can do is I'm just taking a pair of scissors. You can use your rotary cutter and a straight edge. I'm just going to trim it to about 1/4 of an inch. Get rid of my extra pieces. And again, I'm going to press it open. You can set your seam first with the iron. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to finger press to get it to hopefully open up and lay a little flat for me. And then I'll take my iron, and I love using this pressing stick. It is they call it the strip stick. And what it is just a wood strip with some padded muslin over the top. And what this does is, because this part of the stick is curved on the top, when you press your seams, you can rock your iron back and forth a little bit over that seam, and it really, really, really flattens out your seam. It gives you a nice flat seam. Bam. Okay, so now what you'll do is you'll continue end to end. You can stop and stitch and do each joined piece if you'd like. I like to go ahead and sew all of mine first, then clip, and then press. But you can do it however you like. Okay. So I am going to pause for the cause. I'm going to go ahead and sew all my strips. I'm going to press them all, and I'm going to have them all open, and then I'll show you how I'll come back and show you how I ironed in just a flash. Okay, so now we're back, and we have sewn and attached all our bindings into one big long strip. So you're going to want to put your strip on your ironing surface and start pressing. Another tool that comes in handy when you're making binding is what they call a clapper, a tailor's clapper. Okay, what this does is it's a piece of hardwood that absorbs the heat. So I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but cotton, the reason that cotton stays so crisply pressed is because cotton fibers have a memory. When you're pressing cotton, you're creating memory in that group of fibers. And if it gets hot and it gets pressed, like with an iron, like what we're doing, like us doing what we're doing right now, when that tailor's clapper absorbs that heat, helps it cool quicker, it sets that memory. That's why you do that. So every time you sew a seam, when you're piecing a project, every time you sew a seam, the first thing you want to do is you want to set that seam. So what I mean by that is that as the seam first comes off the machine. Okay, so we'll pretend like this half square triangle just got sewn together. We've trimmed it to the size that we want. And what we need to do is just set the seam, put the iron on top of the seam just like you sewed it. And what that does is it draws the thread fibers together in the middle between the layers of cloth, which is where you want them to connect. Okay, because this is what creates tension in our between the threads, and we want that tension connection to be in the middle. So what we do here is set the seam. It draws the fibers from both sides, and then we can press it open or press to the dark side, however you want to do that. Okay, and then we press. We don't iron because this doesn't allow the material, doesn't allow the cotton fibers to get hot enough to create that new memory. Okay, so we let it sit for a second. That's pressing, 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 pressing. Okay. So when you're sewing binding on, that brings me to another topic. I want you to always remember that when you're sewing your binding, when you get ready to attach your binding and sew your binding down, regardless of what color you've got in the quilt up next to your binding, you want your binding thread to be sewn with a matching thread color. If my binding is purple, I'm going to use purple thread to attach my binding. Because anything on here, whether it matches out here or not, is irrelevant. You want your binding thread to kind of disappear. And that goes for either machine binding or hand binding. So you want that to disappear. So we want that to go away. This is what I'm talking about. I don't know if you can see it or not, but when I was talking earlier in the other video about when you're making binding, if you make binding where you have a straight end to a straight end seam, as opposed to an angled seam, you know, where you got the angles that come together like this. I don't know if you can see it through the, let that sit for a second. If you can see through the cloth, now you can see, I wish I had a better light behind it. Right here, you can see the seam through the cloth, but you can see that it is spread out over two different areas, and so your domestic machine won't struggle so bad going across that. Okay? So you just go along and you get it all pressed. And then once you press it, you're ready to attach it. So there's just lots of little tips and tricks that are good to know that you come across, and that's one of the reasons why it's so much fun to go to attend quilting classes and to participate in quilting bees. You get the benefit of the socialization, because I think now with the advent of the personal computer, even though Queen Bee Quilting does do quilting bees and they are virtual quilting bees, it's that social aspect of being around other people that enjoy the same things you do. Hobby groups used to meet years ago to do things. Quilting started out as a way to make something functional but pretty, and have it not take forever to get it done. If you got because they quilted by hand, you'd have 4 or 5 ladies, 6 ladies, all the ladies in the neighborhood get together, and they'd get together. It was a time to gossip. It was a time to socialize. It was a time to teach and help the younger women in your community to learn better ways of doing household chores, farm chores, child rearing. I mean, they just talked about everything. And it was predominantly the job, the role of the woman, the responsibility of the woman, to be able to make and create useful items around the household. But they would sew on anything. It just wasn't just quilts. They would get together. They would make trousseaux for young women who were betrothed to be married, or affianced and had an impending wedding coming. They would fill her hope chest full of things that she would need to use in her household, like table linens, for good table linens for company when they had Sunday company, um, for Sunday dinners. If they needed, pillowcases, they would embroider and cross stitch on pillowcases to make them pretty and make them feminine. Curtains for the windows. They, whatever, and they used scraps of everything. Whatever they had. Cloth was expensive and it was hard to come by, and your choices were probably pretty limited back in the day too. So, but it was a good time to get together and be silly with other women, and you know like I said, they caught up on the news in the neighborhood. Who was having, who was expecting new babies, and who's been sick, and who's, how many kids so and so had. Some of these, people that don't necessarily, in their day-to-day thing, they couldn't just pick up the phone and call and say, hey, how you doing, like unlike we do today. If you hadn't seen somebody in 6 months, you know you either hitched up the horse and buggy or you walked over, right? But a barn raising, or a house building, those were things that they would get together and as a community and help each other. We don't do so much of that anymore, but a lot of times we just hire it to be done. So when I'm done ironing my binding, and you could actually, if you were using like a thinner, if you were using a thinner cotton, you could, very easily, you could put a little starch on that, a little best press, or something of that nature. I like to wind mine up. I like to make a spool of my stuff, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it on this, and that way, as I'm feeding it off to myself, to actually attach it to my project, it'll come off and it won't twist. Come off in a nice easy manner, and won't get twisted. Sometimes I just wind it around my spray bottle, wind it around the base of my spray bottle, as I'm winding it up. You could do that. It's still going to get twisted up while you're putting it on, but you don't want to be trying to attach it and manage it while you're sewing it. You don't want it. You want it to be able to be where you need it to be. So I like to put mine on here, and like I said, it comes right off really well. Oops, extra bobbin on there. Comes off really well. This part is slippery. Makes it easier for me to attach. So now, when I'm ready, and what I've grabbed are my clips. Sorry, I have an old project in there. What I do next is I get my clips. I have some medium-sized clips and I have small clips. I use my small clips, I think, more than I do my medium clips, especially on the corners, and I'll show you why. Okay, so when we start talking about attaching or binding, and I gave you a brief look at that with this quilt earlier. This is my cow quilt. So where do you start? Where do you attach? So I'm gonna adjust my camera. Okay, so now you can see me. It's not optimal. Let's see. Need that light. Yeah, all of it. Okay, so that maybe that's a little bit better. Okay, so when I go to attach my binding, I go to the side. Go over here to the side. Wow, my recording's like not doing great. What's going on with my camera? Just a minute. Okay, I've switched camera angles. So when I'm quilting, I'm gonna go to the side of my quilt. Oops. I'm gonna go to one side of the quilt. I want to go maybe a foot and a half down, and I want to attach my binding. And I always attach my binding to the front side of my quilt because I want the pretty side to show. Okay, so I'm going to go about 10 inches or so, give myself, 8 or 10 inches right here, and then I'm going to attach. I'm going to just clip it on. Okay, and I'm going to go all the way around the quilt, clipping it in place, holding it in place. Then I get to the corner. So what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do this corner, I want to zoom a little bit so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it out to the edge of the to the corner of the quilt. Let's see. Let me get it where you can see it. Whoops. I'm going to get it to the end. Okay. See there? I'm at the end. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it back. Pull off enough that I can fold it. Make a fold right here, even with the end of the quilted piece. And then I'm going to turn my corner. I'm going to pull it to the corner. And what you're going to end up with is where it's going to hold is the very point. We'll fold up and fold back, and you want to run this again right in line with the edge. And what that does, or what it should do, is give you a perfectly mitered corner right here. And again, I like the smaller clips for this because it holds it nice and snug. Okay. And so now I have rounded my corners, and if you are like me, I kind of like a little extra something at the corners, a little reinforcement at the corners, because I don't want that to pull out. And sometimes it does that as I'm manipulating the project. And if you have a really big piece, then you want to use the larger size clips to hold this. So you're not using up all your little clips. Because you need at least 4 clips for corners. And you'll need a small clip when you get ready to do the magic trick at the end. So again, let me show you how I do this corner. Is that I'm gonna clip it. I'm gonna make a fold that goes to the very edge of my. Press it, finger press it, mash it down. I'm from Kentucky. We mash everything in Kentucky. We mash buttons, mash it down, squash it down, mash it down. I don't know where you're from, but whatever works. But again, we want to make the binding be right at the edge of our quilt, so we need to pin this in place, and now we've got yet another perfectly mitered corner. Boom. Well, my fold is not perfect. There we go. There it is. Now it's right. Comes right to the edge. I'm going to put another little clip here to hold the edge together. And you're going to find that as you, or I find that once I get sewing, because again, I'm gonna manage it a little bit better, a little closer, pay more close attention as I'm sewing it on. Right now, I'm just kind of holding it in places. Just a real good suggestion of where I need it to end up. Okay, so clip, clip, clip. Queen Bee does offer classes, basic classes. I also work with you one-on-one if you're taking a class and you have questions or you have problems. Um, I am almost always available by phone or text, and you can feel free to talk to some of my other students. I've had folks who didn't even know how to operate a sewing machine when they came and started taking classes with me. And now we're making quilts and we're doing big sampler quilts and learning all kinds of new blocks. I like to try to push you to do something beyond your comfort zone because that's how we learn. That's how we grow. That's how we progress. That's how we get better. You know, sometimes you have to stretch a little bit beyond your comfort zone. I used to tell my children, don't be afraid to stretch. And I find sometimes that as we get older, we're a little more reluctant to stretch than we were before. So I think it's good to have people in your circle that push you to be better, be a better version of yourself. One thing quilting teaches you is attention to detail. It teaches you how to follow instructions, how to read a roadmap, how to read. It's like reading a recipe. If you cook, quilting is like reading a recipe. It's like working a puzzle that has instructions to it. So you have to read the puzzle instructions to be able to put the puzzle together. A lot of men find they start quilting. Once they start, they find that they really like it because they like the geometry of traditional quilting, and they grow so fast in it, that they end up being very, very accomplished quilters, and because they're less afraid to jump out there and try something they've never done before. Because they like the math, they like they may have experience in carpentry, or metalworking, where you have to measure, you have to read a measuring tape or a measuring device. So they're good at, let me add that 1/4 inch to that 1/8 inch. Yeah. And so they get comfortable. They're very comfortable with that. So if you know somebody who would like to learn to quilt, absolutely bring them along. So what I want to show you now is that we've gotten back to our starting point on the side of the quilt. And so I'm going to cut myself, and see, I have a big long tail on this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of bring it over to the other clip, and I'm going to clip it off at about the other clip, because I'm still going to trim it even more, but I'm going to give myself that much. And then I have a scrap that goes in my scrap bag. Okay, now what you're going to do is, remember I told you I like to take a piece of my tail, of the piece that I just cut off, and I will cut a piece, pretty good piece, maybe about a 3-inch piece. Cut that off and press it flat. And that becomes my binding tool. There's a lot of binding tools on the market, but I can promise you that after I figured out how to do it like this, I saw a video. I love watching videos. People who are beginners should watch a lot of videos. You should watch a lot of people do a lot of different things, and you'll find a way that works for you. And sometimes you just have to share that. and that's why I'm sharing with you mine and the why I like it. You know, a lot of people share things, they try to teach other people, but sometimes maybe they don't tell you why they do it that way. So now I've pressed my little piece of binding flat. This was the piece that I cut off of my tails from here. Okay. I'm going to take this piece because remember, this is the piece that I told you I use a darker piece. So what I want to do now is I'm going to lay this flat across. Line it right up on the edge, just like I would if I was going to clip it off. And I'm going to lay this across it just like this. Okay. And I'm going to mark on one side. Again, I'm going to use a blue pen, and I'm going to mark this on the side closest to the end. And I'm going to draw a line. You see, I've got my line. Can you see my line that I drew right there? Might be kind of hard to see because it's blue. There you go. Make it a little darker so you can see. So I drew the line, and that's right on the edge of my piece. And then then the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay the other one right across the top. So now I've got both pieces crossing over each other. You want to lay this on a flat surface to do this. I have to hold it up here so you can see it on camera. But now what I do is I take my pen again and I go to the other, because the cut end of this one, the one that's on top, is on that side. I guess it would be your right. And I'm going to draw a line at the edge of my little tool, my little piece of fabric. I'm going to draw the line there. So now I've got a line on this end, and I've got a line on this end. And then I'm going to take my scissors, and I'm going to snip it. I'm going to snip it off right there at the line. Oops. I'm going to cut it right there at the line. I'm going to move my little binding tool, and I'm going to cut my other piece right there at the line. Now, this is where the trick comes. And I want you to hold your project, because what you'll do is now you will sew all around your project 1/4 of an inch from the edge. I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to go ahead and sew 1/4 of an inch all the way around, and I'll be back. Okay, so I told a story. So what I want to tell you is here's another trick that I learned. When you're trying to manipulate a big project, a blanket or any other project, when you're trying to manipulate a project, especially something bulky, large size and bulky, around your sewing machine, what I have found is that a gardening glove with the rubberized fingers and palm, much cheaper than the quilter versions. They make them. You can buy them on Amazon. I bought a whole bag of them, and they go on either the left hand or the right hand. So when I wear this one out, I've got replacements. But I find that I only use the left hand. It helps me to grip the fabric and move the fabric through. I feel like my hand, if I just use my hand by itself, I feel like sometimes it slips on the material and I don't have a good grip. And when you're working with cotton, the skin on your hands gets a little dried out anyway, so probably keep a little hand cream close by to keep your hands nice and moisturized. But another trick is to use the left-handed gardening glove. So now I'm gonna bind this quick. I'm gonna attach this binding, except for the opening, and I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. Doggone it! I meant to tell you this too. So when you start, you want to do a little back stitch. You're going to start at one section. You're going to find your opening on the other side. Oh, right here. You're going to start at your opening. Okay. We'll start at the one on the right hand side. You're going to start right here. You're going to make a stay stitch. In other words, you're going to either use your back stitch a couple of stitches, you know, stitch backwards a couple of stitches, or you can use your stay stitch if you have an electronic machine that has a stay stitch option button. You can stay stitch right there a couple times and then continue stitching until you get around to the other opening, and you're going to stay stitch that a couple times. And the reason I tell you that is because when we get over here, we're going to manipulate this a little bit, and we don't want to pull extra where we don't need to. Okay, so now I'm going to go sew, and I'll be back. All right, so I realized that I want to show you a trick um, at the corner on how to flip your corners and how to turn your corners and end up with really good results every time. So you can see I've removed a couple of my clips, and when I get to the end, I'm going to take a piece of tailor's chalk. That's what this is. It's just tailor's chalk. It's beveled so that it has a sharp edge, and I use that flat edge to create a line about 1/4 of an inch. Because when you're sewing your binding, you're going to sew 1/4 of an inch down until you are a 1/4 inch seam down the side of your quilt. You can use your 1/4 inch foot, and you're going to sew until you get down to about 1/4 of an inch away from your corner. So this is where the corner is, and you're going to see that as this stitches down, this line right here that I just drew is going to get a little closer to the end. But what I want you to do is I want you to get down here to this intersection. Okay, we're going to come all the way down until we get to that intersection. I hope you can see that. Let me zoom in a little bit more. Zoomy zoom. You still can't see it. Trying to zoom in some more. Well, that's at 400, so that's about the best you can do. So, I wish there was a way to turn the light off. So, what I do is I've got the straight line coming down this side, and about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of my quilt, I've drawn another line. So now I have a crosshairs right here in the corner. You can't see that because of the light, and I apologize for that. But what I'll do is I'll sew down until I get to this other line at this point. I don't know if you can see that or not. Yeah, now you can see it. I'll sew until I get to this intersection right here where it crosses. Okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let me show you. I'll get down there really slow and I'll show you. Okay? And I'll get down to that point. And I'm going to stop when I get to that point with my needle down. I'm going to lift my presser foot and I'm going to turn my piece so that the point up underneath here, that point is pointing at my needle line. Can y'all see that I use what's it called? The washi tape to help me with my 1/4 inch seam tape here. The red line is my needle line. So I'm going to turn the corner. I'm going to turn the corner of my piece. So this is the corner right here. Oops, let me get it up there so you can see. So I'll turn the corner, the very point, to run along this seam line. And I'm going to drop my presser foot back down and I'm going to stitch right off the edge. I'm going to cut my thread, lift my presser foot, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this seam, and I told you it's a little finicky, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to this one's still laying flat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this back up and to the right until this edge makes a straight line. Let me show you better. Now this edge is a straight line, and I'm going to finger press that. Makes a straight edge, and I'm going to finger press it, just like that. Now I'm going to fold this back along the edge of the quilt until this edge, the fold is right on the edge, and I'm going to finger press that. Now I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to hold it in place, and I'm going to put this back underneath the presser foot. And I'm going to put that needle down at the very edge in that fold. Okay? You have to be kind of persnickety with your needle placement. But now I'm ready to start and sew along this line. Sometimes I have to use a stiletto and go right up underneath it because we've got a lot of material folded up underneath here. And so to assist this to move along, I will put my stiletto underneath that toe closest to the blade on my 1/4-inch foot, and I'll push a little bit to get it to move along. But I don't need to do that all the time. So now here we go, sewing along the edge, holding my thing. You see my nice grippy glove there holding on. And I'm going to stitch. I'm going to stitch along. And I'm going to stitch all the way down until I get to the next corner. And I'm going to repeat that process on all the corners. And you see that I had to remove several of my clips. And so what happens is you see that I've got this bump here. I've got lots of play. You'll get around to the part where we marked it and clipped it, and it'll be a little long, and we'll have to remeasure that and remark that. But that's okay. We can do that when we get there. Y'all, this is real sewing. This is a real person that struggles with things and does things in real time. Look at there. I've got a thread from my project has got caught up on my presser foot. We'll just move that out of the way. And y'all all know that some fabrics are just hairier than others. They want to fray more than others. So make sure that, you want to try to clip your threads if they're excessive. Sometimes you just kind of got to move them out of the way and keep going and trim them up later. Queen Bee hadn't hit the big time yet, so we're just small potatoes out here. I'm just another real person sewing just like you sew. I'm just sharing what I've learned in my short time period of quilting. I started quilting right before COVID kicked off. It was something I'd always wanted to learn how to do, and I had a friend, my good friend Terry, bless her heart, my quilting buddy, my quilting BFF, my ride or die. She was willing to work with me and show me what she knew, and honey, it blossomed from there. And the next thing you know, here I am with Queen Bee doing this for a living. By trade, I'm a nurse. I'm a registered nurse. I used to work in I've worked in a emergency medicine all my life. All right, so here we are at a corner. I'll tell you some more about me here in a minute. So here we are at the corner, and again, a quarter, we're doing a 1/4-inch seam. We're sewing along at a 1/4 inch seam, but now we want to make a 1/4 inch on the new edge. So I'm going to take my tailor's chalk, and I'm going to make my little crosshairs. So I know exactly the point that I'm trying to get to right there. When I get right there, I'm going to turn it and I'm going to come and I'm going to sew it at an angle and sew off my piece and cut my thread. So here we go. We're going to get down to the point. Bam! There we are at the point. Lift my presser foot, turn my piece so that the point of my fabric, the edge, that corner that I've created at the corner is pointed right toward the red line on my diagonal seam tape. That's the words I was looking for a while ago. Sorry about that. So I was looking for my diagonal seam tape, and now I am going to run this machine, and I'm going to run it right off the edge. What that does is it creates a place for a fold to happen. I'm going to cut my thread, lift my presser foot, and now I'm going to take this fabric. I'm going to take it loose a little extra long so that you can see. I'm going to fold it back to the right so that it makes a straight line. It lines up with the edge of my piece. I'm going to finger press it down, and then I'm going to fold it back. I'm going to make another fold down here in the corner. Straight line, that fold on that edge lines up with this edge of my piece. I'm going to mash that down with my fingers. And I'm going to line that fabric up on the edge of my piece, and I'm going to turn it back and get it ready to go up under my needle. Okay, so get that fold down. Okay, I'm going to get my stiletto out so that I can hold that piece in place. I'll come over and line it up against the edge of my presser foot, my 1/4 inch foot. I'm going to drop my foot down, drop my needle down. Whoop. See, I got a couple stitches in there and it doesn't want to go. So here we go. I'm going to put see how I put my stiletto in under the foot closest to the toe, and I'm going to give it a little extra push. Just a little tiny bit, and it'll take off and go right by itself. And here we go again. We're going to run down this side. Okay, so more about me. I had taken home economics back in junior high, that would have been the 70s. Back in the 70s. I'm old as dirt. Yeah, so I took home ec back in the day, and I made a couple of garments in class, and about 30 years ago, I got pregnant, and I decided that I wanted to sew some baby clothes. So I went and bought a bunch of flannel in little soft baby colors, and I made my firstborn child some flannel baby clothes. And then I put my sewing machine up, and probably didn't get it out except to maybe sew up a pair of pants once or twice. And it pretty much just collected dust until right before COVID starts. I took it out. I took it to the sewing machine technicians and had them service it and clean it because I'm sure it was full of dust. And the oils and the lubes had gone bad from years of neglect and non-use. And so I whipped out my sewing machine and I started sewing, quilting, doing easy projects. And the more I got into this hobby, the more I thought, with the onset of COVID, we learned that we could do things via video camera, just kind of like we're doing now. So if I could teach, because I was a nurse, I was working for a local community college and teaching their CNA program. And I thought that if I can teach another adult how to take care of a human when they're sick or injured, over the internet, I can certainly teach somebody some sewing tips and tricks and tools and whatever I know. I can pass my knowledge on via the internet. So that was what I wanted to do with Queen Bee. And part of Queen Bee is because while piecing is fun, I really enjoy quilting the designs on the finished piece project. That to me is adding that final, beautiful, elegant touch that makes you feel like you're sleeping under something super special. You know what I mean? Um, and the designs that people are able to do, it just fascinates me. They're just beautiful. And I have collected dozens upon dozens of them in my computer memory so that I can put them on your quilts. So if you learn to quilt, if you want to learn to quilt and you quilt with me, or if you already quilt and you're looking for somebody to a long arm finish your quilted project, I am more than happy to provide that service for you. And that's how I got into this and how I created Queen Bee. Because I kept thinking, when I retire, I would like to have beehives, which is where Queen Bee came from. And I want to help raise my own honey, and I'll sell honey and or beeswax products as a side hustle, an old lady side hustle. Supplement that insurance, that Social Security check. Supplement that retirement. One thing I want to tell you is that if you have foldable legs on your sewing machine, you gotta be careful that you don't knock your legs loose. I do that all the time. Um, so that's where Queen Bee came from. Um, and Queen Bee Quilting just kind of rolled off my tongue, so that's where the name for my business has come from. I do have an upcoming block of the month club, or block of the month class, not club. I have a block of the month coming up where you will create the same block a lot of times, and you'll make a row of them across your quilt. That's why it's called a row quilt. And it'll have 6 rows, and so you'll learn how to do one block each month. And at the end of the 6 months, you'll sew all your rows together, and you will have made a whole quilt top. Here we are at another corner, and we pull it out to it makes a straight line. Flip it over and fold it. Finger press it in place. And then we're going to make another fold. We're going to line it up with the edge of the quilt again. And that's what makes your 45-degree miter corner on the corners with your binding. Turn it, head it back up underneath the needle, right at the edge. Put your presser foot down right at the edge. Drop your needle down. Might need your stiletto. Give it a little assist. And then you're ready to go again on a new edge. and there's some of us that sew really fast, but there's sometimes when you just got to slow down. Okay, you just got to do this a little slower and pay attention to what you're doing. So I'm going to tell you that when I'm sewing by myself here in the studio, I usually either have Pandora on playing my preferred playlist, um, or I have Audible going, and I can listen to a book or a podcast while I'm sewing. That way, I feel like I'm multitasking. I'm getting a lot done at one time. Sometimes I have to remember I can't just put the pedal to the metal and sew real fast. Sometimes I got to slow down. So you'll see me with my fingers just like this, holding holding my fabric. Okay, that's just a way for me to keep it from getting wrinkled, keep it from getting bunched um, as I'm going along. You don't ever want to pull your fabric, because even though it's straight cut, it's cut on the grain or across the grain, it still does have a little bit of stretch in it. And you just really kind of want to gently pull it tight across your fabrics just so that it doesn't have folds in it, but you don't really want to pull it, because if you pull it, it'll buckle it up and then it'll look bad. The finish will look bad. We want it to just lay flat. And I know that when I teach piecing, I teach you to do a little section at a time. If you sew a big long section and you just keep feeding it in, every time you take your hand off and push a new section in, every time you have a tendency to do a little shape kind of like this. Whether you think you're doing it or not, it does happen. So do shorter sections. And concentrate on lining your edge up with your 1/4 inch seam or with your 1/4 inch foot. And just go slow. And here we are at the edge of this corner. So I take some clips loose. Look where my corner was. Look where it is now. See, I had a lot of play. I had a lot of tension, a lot of slack. Okay, so we're just taking that up, and that's fine. Fine is wine. I'd rather it be too long than too short, I promise you. Woo! Okay, so here I am. I'm going to mark this end down here at the 1/4 inch, or where I think it's going to end up at a 1/4 inch. Right there. And I'm going to sew right down to that 1/4 inch. I get to that point, one more, bam, there it is. I'm going to pick it up, turn it, and I'm going to point the corner, will point at my red line on my diagonal seam tape. That's such a good tool to have. Because it's tape, it doesn't stick. The adhesive, even though mine looks pretty ratty, I probably need to replace it, and I will. But I'll wait until it wears completely out, I reckon, just because that's me. All right, so again, I'm going to fold it. I'm going to fold it back, and remember, because I've done a seam, when I turned it and pointed the point of the corner down my diagonal seam tape, what I do is I create a seam. I create a seam that runs right across. It runs diagonal this way. I've got a perfect diagonal right there. So when I fold this back and I line it up on the edge so that it makes a straight line down here on this edge, I finger press that, fold it back until the folded edge, the new fold will be even with the edge of my project. Finger press it down. Just mash it. Just mash it good. I put my hand on here and I turn my project. Now, this is my last edge. This is my fourth corner. I want to drop it down at the edge. Bam, needle down, press your foot down, then needle down. I need to pay attention because I'm coming up to the end of my section. Oh, come on. Get your stiletto out, Lynn. Come on. Boom, boom, boom. Let's go. Give it a little assist. And there it goes. We're not trying for perfect. We just want it finished. And we're gonna mow down, sew right down that 1/4 inch line. Okay, I got 2 more clips to go. There's one. Ooh, I got a lot of extra. That's not a bad thing. Okay. So long. I'm gonna move that clip. I'm getting down to my end here. Y'all, I'm getting to the end, All right. Now, remember I said you want to give yourself about 10 inches. So we're about at the 10-inch mark. So we're gonna come up here. We're gonna get to a point. I'm gonna do a stay stitch. It's stitching in place. It's just like a thread off. And then I'm gonna hit my back button for a little extra insurance, and I'm gonna cut my thread. Raise my needle, raise my presser foot up, and I'm gonna take this out. Now, I've got, let me zoom out a little bit. We're going to go back to that. What did I do with my tool? There it is. Okay. So now I have my binding tool again. And I've got my edges. Look at that. It's a little bit longer than I had anticipated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back up here. Okay. I'm going to put this one back over here. Because see, now I'm a little long. I'm a little longer than what I needed to be originally. So I need to readjust here. We want this nice and flat. We want it to lay nice and flat. So we'll kind of put this little piece of fabric right in the middle of our opening. See how I've done that? Kind of right in the middle. And you need your little binding, I call that my binding tool, that little piece of fabric from your binding. You want that little tool to kind of run with a straight edge there. And we're going to take our tailor's chalk or our pen. Friction has these colored pens you can use. They're supposed to come out with iron when you iron them. Sometimes if they get cold or you get cold water on them, the marks reappear. So sometimes I don't use this necessarily to quilt designs on my quilt, but I will use it to mark an edge. So remember, on the one underneath, you mark on this side, right on that line. On that side, you fold this back over, nice and flat. And you're gonna mark on the end on the left side. Make your lines. Can y'all see those pretty good? I think. Now we can. And now I need to trim these up again. So where's my good scissors? Whoop, whoop. Where'd it go? Oh, hello. There they are back here. Okay. So now I'm going to retrim to my new lines. No biggie. I'll just save those little tiny pieces and use them as leaders. They call them leaders and enders. Do y'all use these? Where it's a little scrap of fabric where you start, like if you're going to do something that has corners or you're going to be doing diagonal seams, you could put this under and use it as a starter And that way, all you have to do is start your new whatever. We'll pretend like that white one's going in next. So if you're going in and you were going to sew a diagonal corner, you could run your diagonal corner with the point to the line, point your corner at the needle. And what happens is you end up with a string that runs between your leader back here and your new piece down here. Because sometimes if you try to sew on a brand new corner, there's not enough fabric under your dog teeth underneath here, and the dog teeth are what pull your fabric forward. Okay, so as they're moving, they kind of move in a circular thing, and they pull your fabric backwards under the machine, right? You ever notice it feeds itself in? Well, that's how it does with those dog teeth. Puts pressure up underneath your presser foot, and it pulls your fabric. Because that presser foot is slick underneath there, and it allows the fabric to feed in. So sometimes if you're doing a corner, that needle hits that corner and there's not any material over here on the sides to hit the presser foot yet, so it just makes a knot right there. So to keep that from happening, you run this leader piece in, and so now it has a string, and you can actually use this to pull your fabric forward at the same time. Like that, and it doesn't get your corner stuck in the back of your needle well, where in the hole where the needle goes down. Let me show you what that looks like up close. Just gives you a little thread attachment and gives you something that you can pull it along with. So that's very handy. That's a good tip. Thought I'd share that with y'all. So I just keep those over here to the side of my sewing machine. All right, but let's get back to this binding because that's what we're doing now. All right, so I've taken my glove off. Okay. You want your binding tool to be the exact same size as your binding. Just makes it easier because that way you get a more perfect junction. Because what you're creating is a junction. You're joining two pieces. So you want to use the same size measurement on your binding. So now take a small clip, because you got to sew around it, and you're gonna just fold your quilt up like this, because you need to shorten it. And what you're doing is giving yourself extra room here. You're gonna take the one on the left, and you're gonna open it and put your wrong side down. Then you're going to take the one in your right hand and you're going to open it wrong side up. So you're going to put the folds on the thing. You're going to make a cross, okay, with those folds. And what that does is that gives you, remember when we sewed the binding together, we sewed it at a diagonal angle? That gives you a diagonal from which to now sew the ends of this together. We're going to sew from corner to corner, from this corner to this corner in a straight line from corner to corner, and that'll give you that little end to clip off at 1/4 of an inch. And I'll show you that. Let me go ahead and sew this line. This is why you have to use that clip on the projects piece. If you're using diagonal seam tape like I am, I just mark the edges because sometimes it's hard to see where your corner, the one that's hiding underneath, it's kind of hard to see where that corner comes out. So I mark it just because I need to have that visual thing. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this clip off, and if I've done everything correctly, when I stretch this back out, I should have binding that perfectly fits that opening and all I've got to do is trim this off. But I'm going to tell you, don't make that rookie mistake and just think, okay, so now I've got it sewn, I can go ahead and clip it off. Because there's been times when, for whatever reason, I didn't gather up enough, or it's too long, and I end up with a loose binding, and I have to go back and take that seam out and redo it. But if you clip this off before you test it, you might find yourself too long, and that'd be a bad situation to be in. So now I can clip. Now that I've tested it and I know that it works, I can clip this. I can trim this corner that I don't need anymore to about a quarter of an inch. Just eyeball it. That's what I do. Just eyeball it, and I can press this. Take this over to my little pressing station and press this open, nice and flat, like I did my seams from earlier. Whoops, got you wobbling a little bit. Sorry about that. I hope I didn't make you seasick. I'll press this with my iron, press it nice and flat, and then it lays down nice and flat, and I will finish this project attachment of the binding. I'll go back over here to where my little where I stopped is now my new start point. Adjusting my stitch length, and I'm going to sew this opening little sections at a time until you get where you're going. And then I can do a stay stitch, or I can do a back stitch. Cut my threads. And now my binding is securely attached to the front of my quilt. And I do that because when I attach it, I want it to be pretty and uniform. And if there's the only thing that should be showing now up underneath this fold is maybe some strings that you'll need to trim. But because when people show off a quilt, they usually show off the front of the quilt, not the back of the quilt. And if this was, because this is a wall hanging, if I have any extra fabric over, I would rather it look pretty on the front, because I'm not so interested in showing off the back of the quilt. Even though my back of this quilt is like very eye-catching and it's very busy, it'll be up against the wall, so very few people will ever see that. So now what I do is I take and I press this in place. I press it up so that I get a nice, clean, flat press, because we don't want to press it down and leave pleat here, because we're going to fold this edge over to the back, and then we'll sew it down on the back side here. Okay. I will go ahead and press this, and I'm going to clip it down. I'm going to fold it over the edge of my thing. I'll go ahead and clip it, and then I'll come back and show you how I attach it to the back from that point. Okay, as if this video wasn't even longer, I'm going to show you two other things that I think are kind of important to keep in mind because you're adding the finishing part of your quilt right here is the binding. Okay, it's probably the part I like the least, but I think it's the most important part because it gives your hard work a frame. Okay, so if you're going to hang a wall hanging, and because this is a wall hanging, and I think it needs to be, you want your corners, because the whole purpose of doing a mitered corner is so that it's square, it's finished, it's very pretty, it's very attractive to the eye, it looks very professional. You look like, oh, I'd really know what I'm doing. So if you look closely at this corner, there is the fabric. We remember that the fabric is bunched and folded in that corner. So you see all that fabric if you flip this over, actually lays on this side of the corner. Okay, you see it's laying on this side. All that extra fabric is under this side. That'll be coming in here. It goes under this side. So when you fold your bindings, over, what you want to do on the back side is you want for it to fold it over, and if you look at your stitch line, that should be 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. So you want to fold this so that your fabric goes just a little bit beyond that fold, and it should come out at the end, and you should have nearly a close to a 45-degree angle here with that fold. And then you want to hold that, and if you need to take a stiletto of some kind, and whoops, we can take a clip and hold that down right there, perfect at that corner. When you fold this side down, because now we've got this side clipped and folded, let's put another little clip on here so you can see. My clip is just going beyond, just a little bit beyond that stitch line. That's kind of my guide when I'm getting ready to sew, because what I'm going to do when I flip this over, I'm going to run my needle right here, right along the seam line. That's why when you get this done, you need to iron it and push with the edge of your iron. So the edge of your iron is pushing up, and it's going to push and lay flat. Okay, so it's going to have your material push. How can I get this? Ooh, I need to come this way. So it'll push it over, and the iron will force it to lay flat and cause the fold. So when I sew on this side, I'm going to sew right here as close to that edge, that seam that I already sewed. I'm going to sew along that edge. That's called stitch in the ditch, because it makes kind of a little ditch, and you're going to run, your needle is going to go up and down right along that seam line, so that the stitch, the thread that now matches your binding material will actually come through on the edge on this side. It'll come through just barely catching that edge on this side. Okay, so use enough clips when you're clipping your binding down in place. Use enough clips, put them closer together than you think you need to, because you really do need them closer together, which means you got to have a lot of clips. I sell large, medium, and small clips in my online shop, so you can just go into the shop now button, click on that, and it'll take you to my shop, my online shop on my website, and you'll see that I have some there for purchase if you're interested in purchasing some. All right, so again, we want to be just barely over and across the edge of this binding. The folded edge needs to come over and hide that stitch line on the opposite side. Okay, we're gonna just push it, clip them down. Try to tuck your edge strings. You can tuck them in up underneath your binding, which is kind of what I do. That way I don't have to cut and cut and cut and cut and cut. There's a lot of strings on a quilt, in case y'all didn't know that. Okay, so cut and cut and cut, cover, clip and clip, and keep clipping. Okay, so now what I want you to pay attention to is, again, let's go back and look at this corner. So all of our fabric is on this left side, and you can tell if you look right here, you can see that it kind of goes underneath the other one. The edge of this side right here goes underneath this fold. The fold is on top. That's where all your fabric is underneath that folded area. And so we want the other side, when we fold the back side down, we want that to put the extra fabric on the back side, we want it to be on the other side. So on the top, if I could pin that, clip that in some way. Hang on just a second. Let me put a clip close to it so I can show you what I'm doing. It's not quite over the edge. Okay, so now we want all the fabric this time to be on this side. Because if you flip it over, it's all on this side. So now we've got all the excess fabric tucked under on this side. On this side. Fabric's tucked on the right on this side. It's tucked in under the left on this side. That way when we go to sew around this corner, okay, it won't be all the extra fabric is on this side. So when you look from the top, you'll see it goes under on the top, up under to the left, and this side goes up under to the right. So if you look, it's stacked exactly the opposite way. And you would think that you would want it to both fold under on both sides and be the same way, but really and truly you don't, because there's excess fabric that's being hidden in that corner. And if you make it, if you put all the fabric on one side, it might round that corner. It will take away that nice, sharp, square edge that we want to achieve. Okay? So again, you want to probably put your binding clip real close to that corner, and then put your binding clips on this edge. Again, you want your binding clips to come over and just barely cover that edge. Okay? And then you'll clip all the way around. But now, because I am making this a wall hanging, I'm gonna take a scrap of fabric. I had an extra 10-inch square piece from another quilt that I did. And these don't have to match. They don't have to be anything. They're fun, they're funky, they're never going to be seen except from the back side of this wall hanging. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a loop right here in the middle of my quilt that's hidden underneath my binding. So if I wanted to come back later on, take it out and switch it and do it a different method, I could. You can hide a pocket back here. Okay, so I'm going to put one right here. So I'm going to clip this down. Oops. I'm going to clip this down. I'm going to clip on either side so that I know that I have a pocket there. And that way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide a piece of wood to go in here and hang so that I can hang my wall hanging up. Okay, so I'm going to clip these and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Just give me just a second. Whap, whap, whap. So I'm going to put this piece in the corner, exactly in the corner. I cut a nice square. It's going to fit exactly in the corner. And I'm going to fold my bias down over top of this piece of fabric. I'm going to clip it, clip it, clip it. Clips. Clip along, clip along, clip along, little doggy. This is one method for a quilt hanger, a way to hang something on the wall. So now I got to remember that I want so all my fabric is tucked on this side, on this corner. So I want to tuck it and put it all on this side. So this one is going to be a little different. It's going to be, I'm going to fold the right side first and then the left side. And what that does is, again, it gives me a nice square corner on top, because now I have even more fabric. So I want it to be the opposite. Just switching out my bigger clips. Okay, so this makes a pocket where I can stick a piece of wood to hang on the wall to give me a method by which to hang my wall hanging. You do this at both corners. This is also another way that you could put a blank piece of fabric here. All I did was take a 5-inch square. I took a layer cake actually, and I cut it in half, and I used 3 of the 5-inch squares, 2 of which I folded into triangles so that they create the pocket underneath. If this were a like a piece of white or light colored fabric, you could take a fabric marking pen, of which I cannot find. Oh, there it is. You could take a fabric marking pen, one that's designed to, it's a permanent ink, and you could write a message on your quilt if you're going to give your quilt or wall hanging away. If you use a light color, you can hang it up there and write on there, you know, handmade by Lynn, such a date, whatever, 2024. Okay, and it won't come out. And this is a way that you can create a label. I want a smaller label, but because I do have a large expanse here, I wanted to be able to hang it on a piece of wood, like on a slat, a wooden slat, and that will allow me to put up 2 nails or 2 screws or 2 wall hanging appliances and hang that on the wall without, so that the quilt can lay pretty and flat. Because that, you know, we made it as pretty. We want to see it, so we just lay it flat. But then again, you just tuck it under, just like you would, matching, trying to get that edge just across that seam line. And we're going to do it on this side, just across the seam line. Okay, got these corners. And now we can just go along and, you know, if you use, so it needs to lay on this side first. This side goes down first. So let's clip this side down. One there. We're going to go up here, lay that down. A nice split edge. Nice straight edge. Get that tucked under nice and neat. And you can flip that corner. See how it comes together just perfectly right there? I just love that. And then we're going to push this little edge back just a little bit because I think it's kind of going over the edge. And you can feel it with your fingers. You can feel the seam because you've got that lump there. You can feel it with your finger on this side. You can feel when you're at the seam. Okay, So this is just that I have to do these two corners just a little bit differently because I am attaching that thing. You could put this, these are at the top of the quilt to hang at the top. Like I said, you could use the same method to go along the bottom of the quilt. You can put it on the bottom of a bed quilt if you were making a bed quilt or a crib quilt. And you can put in your own handwritten label. They also make iron-on labels that you can purchase different colored permanent fabric markers, and you can color them yourself to be whatever color you want. You can coordinate them with the colors in the quilt, and you can, again, you can write your own personal message to the recipient of your quilt. Or if it's just something that you're archiving, you want to archive it and keep it for yourself and remember why you made that particular quilt, um, so that if the quilt will be part of your legacy to your offspring. You can have that as a method by which to allow them the opportunity to know why you made the quilt. And again, you probably want to clip this a little closer than you thought you would. Just because that little edge, that rolled edge is hiding that seam line. You need to be able to know exactly where it is that you need to stitch. So if you take the extra time here and clip it a little closer than you think you need to, you can use the edge of the clip to know where that seam line is. If you pay attention when you're doing this, you want to roll it up and you can feel the edge. You just want it right there at the edge, because otherwise you'll end up stitching like really far in, and that'll leave a big flap over here. Now, because this is cotton, if you apply heat to this, you get it wet. We always wash our quilts in cold water, right? If you get it wet and you dry it and there's any heat applied to it at all, it's going to shrink a little bit, but it ain't going to shrink that much. It's just not, y'all. It's just not. So again, you want to try to get that folded area as close to that seam line as you can. Now, if you're using a 2.5 inch, when you go to once you get it folded over, you will be able to palpate with your finger the edge of your project, and you may have a little extra fabric underneath there, so that what I mean by that is the edge of the quilt does not go all the way. See, if I folded this all the way down over top of that and I stitched it, I would be stitching 1/4 inch away, so I would be here in the middle, and I would have a lot of flap left over here. See that? So once you get comfortable doing your own bindings, you might want to consider either using a larger than 1/4 inch seam allowance when you first attach, or using a smaller binding. So instead of a 2.5 inch binding, you can go to a 2.25 inch binding, or even a 2 inch binding. If you want your binding to fit really snugly to the edge of your project, you might want to consider decreasing the width of the binding and using a smaller binding. I will tell you that if you go to a like someplace like Hobby Lobby, where they sell fabrics and bindings and notions and things, they do have blanket binding. You can purchase blanket bindings. Like for a baby quilt, I remember when I was little, mine had a satin binding, and that was a pre-manufactured blanket. It wasn't a quilt. But that was my whoopee, and it took me a long time. But what I did was I took my fingernails and I rubbed my fingernails on that, and for whatever reason, to me, that was very soothing, and that was how I went to sleep. So here again, we're at the corner. I have looked to see this edge is tucked under, so I want the opposite edge to be tucked under on this corner. So I bring it up here. I'm going to use my stiletto to help me remember where my corner is, and I'm going to fold that down. And I'm going to push it back until it barely gets the corner here. And get that edge up real close here. And I want this edge to come up here and barely cover that corner. And when it does, it lines up here. So again, I'm going to use the smaller clips. Come up here and hold this really close, right at the edge there. Come on now. Come off of there. I'll put another clip out here a little closer because I want to keep that binding edge right there on that seam. And I like to put this clip on the actual, oops, snip that little thread there because it doesn't want to pull. And then I want to, again, I'm going to keep going with the larger clips down here just because. That's what the chicken. Why did the chicken cross the road? Just because. That was my chicken joke. I don't know many chicken jokes. But again, you just have to slow, well, just like when you're stitching, sewing on your machine, you just have to slow down when you go around those corners so that you can get them to lay down nice and flat. Use your tools, okay? So when I met my husband, and I've never been involved with anybody that was a serious true carpenter, and I can tell you that one of the first things that my husband ever taught me when we were dating is that for every job there's a set of tools, and you should always use the right tool for the job, because it does make it so much easier to do what you want to do and to have the outcome that you expect to have. You should always use the right tool for the job. I mean, sometimes you just don't have the right tool available anywhere, and you just have to make do. And there's a lot to be said for somebody who has the kind of ingenuity to make do. But in most things, we have access to good tools. And if you possibly can, if you can't, maybe you can find somebody that has a tool that you need. Maybe they'll be happy to loan it to you. I can tell you that one of the other things that he taught me is that the answer, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And another thing that's very pertinent to quilters is measure twice, cut once. Because I swear to y'all, you cannot, if you cut it off, you cannot always put it back on. Okay? Now, the other side of that coin is that as a sewist, person who is proficient at sewing is a sewist, right? As a sewist, sometimes you can add on to what's not long enough, right? Sometimes we can actually do that. We create a seam. So sometimes if you don't have a piece that's long enough and you got another little piece, you can go in and you can add another piece. But just know that you're going to have another visible seam. And so if we can avoid doing that, we want to, at all costs, we want to do that. We want to avoid having to make that extra seam, especially if we don't have to. We always want to set ourselves up for success, right? A little prep work sets you up to do the best job that you can do. Another thing that my husband has always taught my two boys is that you should always do everything in excellence. Don't get in such a hurry that you can't do it in excellence. Tuck your strings in or cut them off. That's your call. I don't mind tucking them in because I don't have time to stop and cut them all off. They just add. They fill in those empty spots on the inside. That's kind of my take on that. There we go. So now I have pinned all the way around. I've got my pockets for hanging. And that's to run the piece of wood through to add, to keep when it's hanging on the wall, you don't want it to sag in the middle. That way it doesn't have to sag in the middle. Okay. So now I'm ready to stitch my I'm ready to stitch my binding on from the back to the front. And let me get set up and I'll be right back. Okay, I want to show you all before I get started sewing. Normally, I sew with a regular 1/4" foot that has the guide blade on the side, right there. I don't know if you can see that or not. It has, you see it? It has this extra guide blade, a metal blade that sticks out on the side, and you run your fabric up against that, and it keeps you sewing a standard 1/4" foot. But this is what's called an open toe foot. And on this machine, this open toe foot actually has got a red arrow marker that shows you, if you're sewing a straight line, that shows you where the needle comes down. Okay, so when I sew my binding on, I use this foot because there's a lot of bulk, and I feel like this manages that bulk. And sometimes because I have extra fabric, it's not going to be a true 1/4" seam, but I'm going to sew on top of that 1/4". I'm going to stitch in the ditch, and I want to make sure that I go slow enough that I can see exactly where my needle's going down. So when I sew my binding on, I want to be able to make sure that I see where that needle's going down, and that little assist, that little aid, that little arrow right there is very, very helpful in keeping you stitching a straight line. Okay, so that's what I put on to sew my binding down, and mostly just because it's a little bulkier, and so it doesn't necessarily attach as well. So maybe consider using, if you have a mark, and if you have an open toe foot, maybe you can put a mark, use a Sharpie or something, and put your presser foot down, and then put your needle down and mark it straight in front of your needle. Put a mark on it. Use a different color, black or red or something, so that you can see, and use it that way. But I wanted to show you that as I get started here. All right. So I'm going to find a little section that has a wide enough opening that I can get it under my machine. And again, because it has an arrow, I put the point of the arrow in the seam, along that white edge. So I'm going to put my presser foot down. I'm going to move my fabric up underneath it until I've got the point of the arrow right on where the white and the blue here on this piece, where the white and the blue come together. That's my seam line from my previous, where I attached it on the front. Remember, where I folded it over. Put it on that line, and I'm going to sew very, very slowly along that line, because now I've got a lot of clips in here, and I'm going to have to slow down and take the clips off, right? And maybe trim a few threads along the way as well that are sticking out from the front side. If I can't pull them off, I cut them. If I can't pull them off, I cut them off. Okay? So now I'm going to drop my needle down, and if you'll look, my needle goes down right in that. Well, you can't see because of the light. The lighting's bad. I'm so sorry. You'll just have to take my word for it. The needle went down in the right place, and I am going to put my stitch length is back to my normal stitch length, standard, kind of that universal, whatever the machine comes up with, it automatically it sets it to that. And I'm going to use my fingers and kind of keep everything on track as it's going in under the machine. That's why another reason why we use so many clips is because we want to keep that seam line lined up, and we can't really see that we're kind of sewing blind. So, remember, we gotta try to keep it lined up, and that's why it's so important to go slow. Use your fingers to feel on the back side, because you can feel where that stitch line is, I promise you. As you go through, you can use your thumb and finger, and you can kind of line it up between your thumb and your finger, because your thumb can feel the top, and your index finger can feel the back, and you can tell whether they're kind of lined up on top of each other. But remember, we want it just a little bit more on the back side so that the thread goes through and catches it. All right, so here we go. Again, we're going to go real slow. Okay, real slow. And I actually put my thumb on top like this so that I can feel it. Once you go a little ways, you want to flip your project over to the other side and make sure that you're on track and that you're staying on track. You want to do that occasionally. So I'm going to finish. I'm going to go all the way around and finish up, and I will be back, and we will take a look at the finished piece. Okay, so from time to time, you're going to find that when you're doing bindings, you get an area that won't catch. Can you see that? It didn't catch right there. So you've got two options when this happens. Okay, you can flip it over to the wrong side, to the back side, and you can reposition your binding, which is the method that most often I choose to try to do. You'll see because you're sewing so close to this edge of this binding. Sometimes even though you have pinned and clipped you'll still have places that don't catch. So all you can do is do your best to get it lined back up. I like to try to sew just inside my previous line of stitching. So if my former line of stitching was right here on the edge or not catching, I like to pull it over, use my stiletto and pull it over a little bit, and I try to again line my little arrow up just inside that edge where I stitched previously. So let's try that. Do a little stay stitch to keep it in place so it doesn't come out. And then I am going to start stitching. And again, I'm trying to stitch inside the seam. I have previous to the right. I'm stitching to the right. As I'm looking at it, it's to the right. Just like one thread over is where I'm trying to stitch. And I'm going to go slow so that I can make sure that I stay there, because I don't want to be stitching out into the body of my quilt on the front side or the good side of this, because this is a wall hanging. So now I've caught that edge, and you can't see any stitching on the front side. So I have accomplished what I set out to do, which was to catch that one little section. The other thing you can do is go back and take a needle and thread and just hand whip it. You know what I mean? You just tack it down with a needle and thread later. Because this is by far the faster method. Um, I don't think it's the best method, but I think it's the faster method. And I think if you go slow and you're very careful and you pin or clip in enough places, I think you can absolutely, I think you can absolutely make it happen. And I think you'll have a good finished project. So that was an awful lot on binding a quilt, but look how pretty that corner came out. Look at that. All of these corners, nice and square. Boom. And I have a method by which I can hang my quilt. And that's it. Thank you for joining me. Tune back in, check out some of the other videos that I have. I'm always trying to add to my video library. So if you heard me talk about a notion or a kit here during this video, please go to the queenbeequiltingnc.com website and hit the shop now, the blinking shop now button, and go into my shopping page and see if there's anything there that I discussed during the course of this video. I do have a lot of new stuff coming in pretty regularly, so please feel free to shop. And there's also a calendar that you can look to see when my next live classes or virtual classes take place. And you have the ability to pay online with a credit card or bank card. So thank you for joining me, and I enjoyed binding this quilt for you today. Take care.